to take this opportunity to thank the Canadian people and the Prime Minister for the steadfast support for the coalition and for the principle standing up against this aggression in the Middle East and Canada.
Newsline with Max Keeping and Carol Ann Meehan.
Good evening. The President of the United States is in town tonight. So far, George Bush and Brian Mulroney have signed an agreement dealing with acid rain, and he preys upon one another for their partnership in the Gulf War. Tonight, they'll have a working dinner at 24 Sussex Drive. On the menu, the Middle East. Newsline's Norman Fetterly now from Parliament Hill.
This is George Bush's first trip outside the United States since the end of the Gulf War. American power and prestige seldom higher. What now preoccupies Bush and the Gulf allies, including Canada, is setting firm foundations for peace in the Middle East. Canada has endorsed the centerpiece of the American plan, essentially a trade by Israel of land in the occupied territories for a peace agreement with Arab countries. The Americans are cool towards a suggestion of Canada's for a special summit on the arms trade, though Bush was warm in his praise for Canada's role in the Gulf War.
And I thank you, sir. I thank the Canadian people. I thank the members of this Parliament for standing in partnership for the principles that gave justice real meaning in the world.
For both countries, this is also the capstone of more than a decade of arguing over the control of acid rain. The Prime Minister and the President signed an accord marking the passage in both countries of laws setting limits on acid rain causing pollution.
With this agreement, we are guaranteeing our children that air quality will never again be taken for granted on this continent.
And here is one that did take two to tango. Here is one where each had to come and give a little and take a little, and it's been worth it. And I think we're doing something good and sound and decent today. Thank you all very, very much.
Bush, as well, was cautious when asked about America's view of Canada's ongoing constitutional crisis.
I am not about to come up here and intervene into the internal affairs of Canada. But I can say from your Canada's biggest trading partner and Canada's staunch friend, that we have enjoyed the best possible relations with a unified Canada. And I would leave it right there.
And Canadian officials are frankly jubilant that the Americans chose Ottawa as the first stop on what might be called the George Bush Victory Tour. It may even, they feel, dispel some of the ignorance that Americans have that Canada was even involved in the Gulf War. Max?
The analogy with a rock star, he's got a 91% approval rating in the United States. Brian Mulroney could only be hoping that some of it rubs off on him.
Well, that came up actually this afternoon. You got to bear in mind these two fellas like each other. So Brian Mulroney said, look, George Bush, you've got 91% in the polls, and I've got maybe about 20. He said, why don't we combine the two, average it out, I guess at around 50-something%, we'd both come out winners. Bush had as good a laugh over that as Mulroney did.
Okay, thank you, Norm.
Right, Max.
What's it like to meet the most powerful man in the world? Well, just ask Donna Reimer and other members of the Yellow Ribbon Support Group. They're a local group that has rallied around our troops in the Gulf. And today, the President of the United States said thanks.
They are the mothers, wives, and friends of soldiers in the Gulf, and they want to meet the President of the United States. Donna Reimer's son will soon be coming home from Qatar, thanks, she says, to George Bush.
I just basically like to thank him for all what he's done and that our troops are all back safe and sound.
There are no guarantees they'll meet the President or even get close enough for a glimpse, but they're hoping for the best.
Are you excited, Sue?
Yes.
Diane? Excited?
Nervous and excited, and suddenly there he is. The President of the United States is coming over to say hi.
Mr. President. Hi. Nice to meet you. I'd like you to have this.
Why, thank you.
Oh, your hands are nice and warm.
Well, I don't know. Maybe I've not been out here as long as you.
This is on behalf of the Yellow Ribbon Forces Support Group. It's for you, President Bush.
Lovely. Nice to see you. Oh, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
This is wonderful. Did they have a lot of support effort for your troops over here?
Yes.
Oh,
The women presented George Bush with a sweatshirt and a yellow rose, symbols the president said of Canada's commitment to the coalition.
The marvelous support for the Canadian troops is just a wonderful thing. And Canada did a first-class job in this. We're proud, very proud.
It lasted no more than 5 minutes, a fleeting moment with the most powerful man in the world. And Donna Reimer can barely remember what the president said.
Trying to remember all what he said. He just said he was, you know, happy that we give it to him and thanked us for it. And, gee, I don't really know what he said. I was just so shocked.
As the presidential motorcade made its way to official business, the Yellow Ribbon Committee got ready to go home. Donna Reimer can't wait to tell her son all about it. Colleen McCurden, CJOH News.
George Bush leaves Ottawa tomorrow morning at 7 to go to the Caribbean, where he's to meet the leaders of France and Great Britain. And David Von Prague, you've just come back from Europe. What are they going to be talking about in addition to just the post-war?
Right, Max, I think probably there was some talk about it here today with Mulroney. And I think, apart from the importance of finding peace in the Middle East, what European leaders and I think North American leaders now also are increasingly concerned about is a situation in Europe where the plan was and still is to cut NATO down drastically on the understanding that the Soviets would drastically cut their forces, the great advantage they had. But when I was in Europe just a few days ago, a German officer at SHAPE, the military arm of NATO, said the CFE, the Conventional Forces in Europe agreement, which was really the most important signal of the end of the Cold War, he called it dead meat. A senior Canadian official at NATO said we have major problems now with the Soviets in carrying out that agreement. The Germans are worried that not only will the Soviets not carry out that agreement, but they will not even take their troops out of Eastern Europe as they're supposed to do by '94. So all these things are causing a debate, which will certainly be talked about with the British and French leaders in Bush, and as I think here in Canada as well.
So we'll reconsider whether we reduce our contribution.
That's right. Canada has not made a decision. What I heard over and over again in Europe is that Canada is the only member of NATO that has not even indicated what its force level will be in Europe, in NATO. And while the Americans are certainly going to cut back, the other members of NATO are very anxious for some kind of Canadian commitment, not only symbolically, but for what it means to security in Europe.
Thank you, David. Now it's your turn.
Canada did a first-class job in this. We're proud.
I think economically it's good for big business and trying to develop Canada sort of into the manufacturing type industries, but culturally I'd prefer more independence.
It seems we get into all the scraps. We just came from the gallery, and you should see the people up there on Parliament Hill saying, "Bush, go home."
You agree with that?
I do.
Yeah, but I think that when we watch our size and theirs, I think that we don't have really the choice.
I think we have to be careful that in terms of alliance with the United States, the idea of reducing everything that we have to a lowest common denominator between the two countries, culturally, Medicare, or otherwise?
No, not at all. We're good neighbors, and we share policies regarding especially stability in the Middle East. That's one important factor.
I do believe that Canada does need to, I guess you could say, stand on its own 2 feet a little bit more.
James Baker, President Bush's very traveled Secretary of State, is tonight in Damascus. Baker is exploring with Syrian President Hafez Assad how to get Syria talking with longtime Middle East foe Israel. As Baker arrived, officials and newspapers said Syria would urge the U.S. to press Israel to accept a UN International Peace Conference and withdraw from Arab territories.
Canada's defense minister was in Trenton today to welcome home the latest contingent of Canada's Gulf troops. Among the 80 people home from the Gulf were 8 from Ottawa, 9 from Kingston. Most of the others were from Bagotville, Quebec. The Kingston personnel were part of the communication system, while most of the Ottawans were from DND headquarters. After the greetings in Trenton, the Ottawa people flew back to the capital with the defense minister. McKnight told the families that they were the unsung heroes of the war, for keeping things together while their spouses were away. He added the forces are now proven and professional after their Gulf duty.
Ahead tonight on Newsline.